this week on Filthy Hope.
Yes, I think there can be unfortunate disconnect between the academy and the church. And I think all sorts of problems arise with that, both directions. I think there's a problem when you've got people in the academy who just don't have an understanding of what it's like to be deeply involved in the community of God. And then likewise, a problem if you're always just caught up in all of the programs and there's lots of deadlines in pastoral ministry, right? You're just constantly having to get stuff done. But I think I bring to it, and I think I was probably, because I was always involved in some kind of academia, I think the whole time I've been in pastoral ministry. But I think I'm even more convinced that bringing that kind of theological rigor, but in a way that is understandable and constructive for people who they're not trained up in it, is vitally important for the health of the church.
Welcome back to another episode of Filthy Hope. If it's your first time here, we're so glad you could join us. On this show, we spend time in the grey spaces where Jesus, life and culture intersect. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Rev Ness.
Hello, brother.
And we've got a very special guest with us. Let's get straight into it. We have Reverend Dr. Megan Powell du Toit on the show.
Clap track. Woohoo!
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is a thrill. We've we're obviously all three of us in podcast land as well as the ministry world. So this is a nice little overlap that we've been trying to make happen for a little while. It's a small world, yeah.
It's a small world, yeah.
It's beautiful. We've been trying to nab Megan for quite some time and have our calendars all sync at the same time. It's just quite beautiful. And in that time, you've changed your life, which is super exciting, but we're going to go there
Sure.
eventually. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess to start off for people that may not know who you are, what's a day in the life of Megan Powell du Toit at the moment? And it's a very existential question we ask podcast guests, but who are you?
Do you know, like, that question of, like, what makes you get up out of bed in the morning? And the answer is my bladder. But that's how the day usually starts.
Yeah.
I don't know. There must be younger people because I'm 50. So anyway, I'm a full-time pastor. I'm in my office here at Rouse Hill Baptist Church. I'm the senior pastor. And I'm also podcast. We're actually in a podcast season break at the moment. But we're still doing things with Michael Jensen, with all due respect. And you've had Michael on.
Yeah, we have. He's one of my buddies.
He got on before me.
Yeah.
It would have been a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
Right? So he was down the road. And
he's my neighbour.
We dragged him
He
in.
is, yeah.
He's my reverend brother neighbour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if he likes me being his neighbour, but I like having him as my neighbour.
He hasn't said anything negative. And then so I've got that going on. I have 4 young adult children. That's kind of complicated. We can get into that later if you want. So 3 of them at home and are married. And I do some denominational stuff. And then, I do various other things that I get to do because I've got a bit of a strange Christian niche fame. Yeah.
Amazing.
I'd love to start with the podcast.
Yes.
Like you said, we had Michael on. I'd have to look back at when it was, but
It was early on, and I felt so exceptional that I'd landed him. And I knew that the two of you were doing with all due respect. And I thought, if we can nab Michael Jensen, then we're going to be able to get Megan. Definitely. Let's try with him. He'll be a soft segue into nabbing her. He was amazing.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a good convo. It was just at the time when the schism in the Anglican Church was happening.
Oh, that's right.
Remember?
Southern Cross Diocese.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And he was really open and very generous, actually, to us uniting church folk who didn't have a clue what was going on, and just really unpacked it just really authentically. Yeah. It was a good conversation.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of respect for him.
You and Michael are doing the podcast.
Yes.
What led to that, and kind of what were the things that
Oh, right. Okay.
How did you get into that? And what was that?
Can I
It
reframe?
was-
Can I
yeah.
reframe?
Sure.
How does an Anglican priest get in touch with a female PhD candidate
At the time, yeah.
At the time, yeah. And a Baptist PhD candidate and want to start a podcast? Because that to me just seems like an odd podcast land marriage. Is
Yeah,
that okay,
yeah.
Jonty?
Yeah, yeah,
I just wanted to spice it up a bit
yeah,
in case she didn't go there.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, so we actually met at Morling College, Baptist College, at a conference, and it was on gender of all things. It was a gender conversation, and he obviously had been invited over as someone from a different space to come and speak on one aspect, and I was a Morling PhD candidate, and was I doing some work for them at that stage? I think I was. So I was also one of the conference speakers. There was a few, it was a few sessions. But actually, the day that I met him for that was a really, really horrible day with stuff going on for me personally. And he started walking over towards me with Mike Bird, actually. So it was two well-known Michaels walking towards me. And I just was like, God, no, not today. I can't deal with a Jensen family member today. Anyway, but he just kept walking, because apparently God thinks that my prejudices can be overridden. Anyway, and then so he's walking towards me, and he was lovely, friendly, asked me all about. Actually, I think at that time was it just when I was finishing off, so I was still in pastoral ministry at that point. I spent some time out and had come back in. I was still just in pastoral ministry then, and had just started my PhD. And yeah, he was lovely. He was asking me about my work with great interest and friendliness, and so we became Facebook friends. So that's how the friendship started, and then we had sort of a sort of a friendship on Facebook, including that when the same-sex marriage survey was happening, he had publicly said he was voting no. I had publicly said that I was voting yes, from a very sort of Baptist church and state distinction kind of position. And but then I found out that he had some threats made towards him and his family. So I got in touch with him and said that I was praying for him, and yeah. So there was kind of a bit of a relationship which developed of that care, I suppose. And then why the podcast happened was me making a joke. So I would never have had the confidence to say to him, we should do this podcast together. It just wouldn't have gone to my head. But we'd had 2 days in a row on Facebook arguing, one argument on his Facebook and one argument on my Facebook.
Wow.
Actually, the argument on his Facebook, he has now come around to my position. Actually, I think he might have come around my position on the second one too. Anyway, but at the time we were on different places, and then it wasn't so much that it was annoying me, but on the second one, I could see that there were some people who were a bit worried, for me, and were jumping into the argument and and I just wanted to take all the temperature down of that. So I said something like, and this is for older people who listen to you, I made a reference to the movie show with Marg and Dave. Do you know that, Jonty? Is that too old a reference?
No,
okay.
You're talking my language.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So I kind of said to him, oh gosh, it's amazing for people who've got some sharp differences that we get along so well. We could even do like a Marg and Dave movie show theology podcast. It was just a complete, me trying to lighten the mood, diffuse things. It was just like social breezing, right?
Yeah.
And a few people jumped on and went, hey, I'd listen to that. I still was just not thinking anything of it until about 2 weeks later, he messaged me and said, let's do it. And I'm like, let's do what? Like, I had not, taken it. I had not made it seriously, the suggestion. But it actually took me several months after that to admit to him that I had wasn't a serious suggestion. I just thought, I'm just going to go with the flow.
Wow.
So it took me a few months to kind of go, by the way, I didn't mean that seriously.
And you're how many episodes in now? Did you say like
Yeah,
120 odd?
130 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And over how many years? Because you don't do it every week. It's
No,
kind of a
it's about
seasonal.
6 years.
Yeah, wow.
Oh, that's extraordinary. Congratulations to both of you on that,
Thank you.
because you've got huge traction and it's such a dynamic conversation that you both have.
Mhm.
It's an unusual coupling. Now, thank you for explaining it.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's coming in with your different theological positions makes it so dynamic and interesting to listen to. It's robust.
Mm.
And there's some similarities too. I think that's like we're both evangelical, but different types of evangelical.
Mm,
You know, we both got English literature degrees.
mm,
So there were some commonalities and some differences. And I think that's the interesting thing is that's what relationships like. There's a mix of commonalities and differences.
mm.
And we want to have the kind of conversation you'd have with a friend
Yes.
Mm.
where you're not like I do remember a few people saying to us when we first started the podcast, but what was the conclusion you came to? And I said, so do you have conversations with your friends in which you come to a conclusion? You go, right, we'll never talk about that again. We finished it off.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
you don't. Like, so it's trying to be more relational. I do know when the very first conversation we sat down and we're like, how are we going to do this podcast? Michael said, oh, do we need an arbitrator? And I said, if we need an arbitrator in it, we failed. We shouldn't bother.
Mm.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
job.
It's such a great model for, we were talking about this in a recent episode about how to have good conversations with people you disagree with.
And
like,
navigate the
that
differences.
it's actually really vital.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you kind of your critical thinking and your ability to stretch your faith in different directions atrophies if you don't actually try and have difficult conversations with people that are built on respect and not on the assumption that you're going to be able to change the other person's mind.
Yeah.
It's actually an exchange, and I think what
Yes.
you guys do is a great model of that. So I just want to say thank you for that as well, because it's a great resource that I get a lot out of.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because in one side, people want you to change the other one's point of view and they don't want you to change yours.
Mm.
You know, so we find people on both our sides kind of like going, what I want from your podcast is that the other person comes around and you never move in anything, you know.
Mm.
Or do you get that from some people, or from other people, they just want it to always be a pitched debate.
Mm.
And, you know, having to say to people, over a relationship long term, you change each other. Like we think that Jesus does that for us. So if we don't think that that's happening in relationship with other humans, what do we even think is going on in relationships? So of course, you know, we've moved on some things, or you know, because you're listening to each other, you're influencing each other. Yeah.
And you're shaping each other and molding each other, sharpening
Yeah.
one another. And I know that we do that for each other.
Oh,
well, you do it for me all the
big time.
time.
Yeah, all the time.
Jonty's like my senior pastor. He sort of whips me into line, Megan. I'll get nighttime texts if I've posted something dodgy on Facebook and he says, I strongly suggest you remove this. And I want to give him the F-bomb, and I often do. And then I go, yeah, no, he's right. He's right.
Yeah.
And then 24 hours later, I get to humbly say, I apologize, Jonty, but thank you. You had my back. You know, it's just beautiful. But you've got to.
Michael and I actually do that for each other too.
It's really special.
Yeah.
I don't think I do it for Jonty, but he does it for me.
In other ways. I don't use Facebook. So.
No, he's watching the brand. He's worried about our brand.
Yes.
So I'm also really interested to talk to you about, and I want to circle back to the way the podcast maybe has influenced your ministry.
Yes.
But to get there, for a bit of context, you're in ministry for, was it 17 years?
So I was in pastoral ministry for 17. Then I went into academia. I had been doing some stuff in academia during that whole time. I'd been juggling. Then I went into an academic role for 8 years, and now I've been back in pastoral ministry for a year. So I've been in some kind of vocational ministry, I guess, if you want to call it that, since 99.
And Megan, what did that look like for our listeners that aren't in church land? What does pastoral ministry look like in your context?
Well, I'm a Baptist, so that's congregational governance. So I've there's a lot of like the kind of the clergy lay distinction is not that sharp at all, really, amongst Baptists. Uh, but I suppose a pastor would be more of an equipping, encouraging kind of role that works
Mm.
alongside all the people in the congregation doing the ministry. Um, but I started off as a student pastor, so I guess that's kind of like an intern role. And I was with youth and young adults, and then kind of as often happens, as your life progresses and you move into new stages, you do different types of ministry, you do different types of jobs or service. So I would then was in charge of congregations, was doing children's and families ministry, did some women's ministry, did all sorts of things like that. But almost every aspect of pastoral ministry you can think of, I've had it in my role at some point, which is quite good now that I'm in a senior pastor role because I'm not coming from a place of I've never done it. I've actually done like most of it
Mm,
over a
mm.
long period of time. So, I'm really aware of all the different parts of the role.
And
Um,
Megan,
yeah.
how does it work in Baptist setting where so you go from being doing adults and young people, and how do you get to be the senior pastor? Is there an educational shift that happens? Where does ordination happen in that
Right,
space?
right.
How does that work for you guys?
Yeah. So I started. So I'm a bit of a narrative person, so I'm going to kind of give you this with my narrative of my life. But I started college just after women's ordination came through for the Baptists in New South Wales. Uh, and ordination, part of that sort of compromise or very Baptisty way of doing that was instead of getting all of the congregations to agree to ordain women, we moved instead to the denomination accredits men and women, but ordination happens at the local church level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but then if you're accredited, that ordination remains. You don't lose it when you move churches or whatever. But that sort of was a way of dealing with that was a very Baptist way of putting back that calling and um, the discernment right back into the local church to some extent. So sort of the more professional side was done with the denomination. I'm now on the committee for the denomination that deals with that actually. So I'm at that end of it now. But so I uh, went for the whole interview process while I was still a student. It's kind of shifted now. People are tending to do it after they finish. There's pros and cons of both ways, and was then a candidate until I finished. And then I was accredited once I was in my first permanent pastoral role post college. And then that
Right.
led to the local church ordination after that. So I think I've been ordained now for over 20 years.
Oh, wow. It's
Mm.
a
Yeah.
long tenure.
Yeah. And I was the first female student to go through that process in New South Wales amongst the Baptists.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
that's huge.
Mm.
When was that, Megan? So was that in the
So
early 2000s?
no, earlier. So I went through the interview process in 99.
Wow.
The first women were ordained in 99,
Okay.
but that was women who already, so I was the first student because I was the first one that wasn't sort of like backlog. I wasn't backlog.
Yeah, wow. So
Yeah.
the Bappos were quite late to the female ordination process,
Well,
weren't they?
depends where, I
Yeah.
mean, our Sydney Anglican friends don't have women ordained as presbyters yet. So
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
It's been with the Baptists in Australia, it's been state by state because we don't really have much national decision making in Australia. So I think the first Baptist woman ordained was in the 70s in Victoria.
Okay. That was about similar time to the Uniting Church, 70s.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I wonder if you go back into Methodist and
Yeah.
Presbyterian traditions as well. That's a
There's another one.
thread that we can
Yeah,
explore
yeah.
another time, I think. But
My father came to faith as a Methodist, by the way.
Oh, go, Peter.
Oh,
Reverend Doctor.
Brian.
Brian.
Yeah, yeah. Peter's
Yes.
Michael's dad.
Peter is Michael's dad.
There you
And
go.
Reverend Dr. Peter Powell we had on yesterday. He is in the Uniting Church. That's why I thought Peter.
Reverend
So-
Dr. Brian Powell is my father.
Yes, that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
both Michael and I have Reverend Doctor fathers, and we're both Reverend Doctors. Yeah.
What was that like growing up as a pastor's kid?
Oh, you know what was really good for me was that my father was in the pastoral role for about 3 years, and then he went over to Moreland College and was in that theological education role. So I was only really the pastor's kid in that sense of in the local congregation when I was about 6 to 8, which is quite nice actually.
Oh, cute.
Yeah, like you're getting
Yes.
lots of extra presents and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fine point. And when I was in high school, he was not in a local congregation in that way. So it's a little bit more, you're still known to be a minister's kid.
Mm.
And I know my twin brother, struggled with that a bit. But for me, I think that just gave a little bit of distance. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
it's
yeah.
excellent, actually. Both my daughters, I wasn't ordained only 8 years ago.
Right.
And so my daughters, while they've grown up in the church, mum wasn't the leader of the church. So it was excellent. They could just be rat bags and nobody cared. It was just another rat bag kid in the church. And I could just let them be free because I was leading the rat bag charge actually myself at the time. In the Baptist church, because I'm a Baptist, you know that, don't you?
Yes. Well, and because you know my
Bappo,
mum.
babe. I know and love your mum, but I'm a Baptist sister. I kind of am a Baptist. I'm a Penty. I'm a Uniting Church girl. The only one I haven't had a crack at is the Anglicans. No, I don't reckon Michael would want me over there.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. You'd probably love it. So which Baptist church were you at?
Dural Baptist.
Oh, which is out near, I'm having lunch with the pastors from there this week. That's right, out near me. Out near me, yes.
Right near you. Yeah, incredible church. Was absolutely magnificent congregation, beautiful people. I've got nothing bad to say about that Baptist congregation. Yeah, they were just awesome. I learnt a lot. I learnt so much, good and bad, about church.
As you do in any church.
In every church.
Yeah, exactly.
In the church. Yeah, it was great.
Yes.
It was really good learning. I'm very grateful for my time there. Yeah.
So you mentioned you were doing some academia.
Mm-hmm.
So you're ordained, you're in congregational ministry.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Have
some
little
academia kids along the way.
How's that for a juggle?
And then academia in there as well. When did that? Because you mentioned you have a literature.
Yes. I'm crazy. I've got 2 honours degrees.
Yeah.
So I've got an honours degree in English and then an honours degree in theology. And then I actually finished, I don't really say this much, you're getting the uncensored version.
Yeah, we love that.
So when I did my theology degree back then, I had the record GPA for Australia across the Australian College of Theology, which is a group of most of the evangelical colleges in Australia, except for more, I think, are in that. So I had the record one ever.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So
sister.
I did honours.
Clap track.
And then so it was on my mind, I suppose, that maybe if you get that, maybe you should go into academia. And I did start working on contract kind of level stuff on the side. As soon as I finished my study at Morling, I started sort of working for them. Look, it's not an easy place, theological education for a woman. Can I just say that? So, and when I first started my doctorate, I started it when I was just starting to have children. And at that time, there were no parental leave provisions in the doctoral program.
Oh, wow.
And so there are now, because I actually got into a role where I was writing policy for the same institution and said, can I write the best practice parental leave provisions for HDR students? So now if you go to the Australian College of Theology, you will find that I put that in. But
that's incredible.
Yes. Yeah, but at the time there wasn't. So I kind of just said to people, oh, look, it's proving too hard. I'm going to come out of it. And no one kind of said, maybe we should have some parental leave provisions. They went, oh, yes, go spend time with your kids. Anyway, so there's a whole lot you could say about that. So I left doing the PhD for about a decade because of that. But I was still doing some work all the time for Morling. Like I would tend to do sort of, if someone was away, I would do that for them. Or if someone had a sickness, I was kind of like their go-to. We've got a little online one that we need looked after. Like I did a lot of stuff like that. And the online director at Morling was a woman, and she was really supportive of me. So I didn't come back to do my doctorate until my children were both in school.
And Megan, did you pick up where you left off?
I did a different topic entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it was a decade, right? Like,
Yeah.
I was no longer interested in the topic. I was interested in a different topic. But the topic I did, the podcast is kind of an outworking of. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to ask you that. That's, interesting. So what was the topic? Can you remember the actual?
Yeah. So I looked at Stanley Grenz, who's a Baptist evangelical theologian, dead now, which was fortunate for me because he stopped producing because he was dead. I mean, maybe he's producing in heaven. I don't know. But that wasn't coming through for me. So that's fine. Sorry. But anyway, so he was my conversation partner. And I had what I really want to look at, though, was evangelical differences and what is the evangelical movement and how do we cooperate together for the kingdom of God in a way that's constructive rather than getting involved in constant boundary debates, I suppose, is where I was. So I was looking at, it ended up being looking at evangelical tensions. Because tension is kind of a word in which there's both a positive, like tension actually can have positive constructive outcomes and also have negative outcomes. So I ended up saying that the evangelical movement has always been what I call tensive movement, and there's always been these differences and these difficulties, and they're actually the point at which if we handle those well, it becomes such a vital mission-based movement when we allow those tensions to exist rather than trying to constantly throw each other out. But if we go back to like the two original major evangelical figures, Wesley and Whitfield, they were like, writing open letters of critique against each other. So like it wasn't all roses then either, but still saw the benefit of reaching across some of those boundaries. So I guess in a way the podcast is trying to do that, of reaching across those boundaries and say, how can we have a really a profitable conversation? And I think Michael and I both see it as a ministry.
Yeah, it is a ministry.
And both of us are coming from, you're formed by the community you're in. So we're both formed in evangelical communities. We feel a burden for those communities. How do we help those communities to be vibrant places of mission rather than, basically eat each other? That's not the wording I used in the thesis, but yes. Technical term.
Yes, my prof at uni would say that would be Simonic language, Vanessa, eating each other. I remember saying, what the hell is Simonic language? And he said, well, it's because you write sermons every week. You've got to stop using that kind of language. I said, well, I'm a minister, brother. I think more people would read these bits of paper if we spoke more normal language. And he said, oh, Vanessa, no.
This was my problem, actually, when I'd just been in pastoral ministry for so long that when I first started the thesis, it was like, Megan, stop preaching.
Yes.
Yeah. I managed to retain a little bit. I sneakily retain bits of it in there, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard, though, because they're on the money, aren't they? They dice and slice you. You don't do as well if you get a bit Simonic.
You've got to be subtle,
Yeah, I know.
But obviously, to care about your thesis, to do it for so many years, like, yeah, it was something I cared about. So
it's really impressive. I remember seeing you on Facebook graduating and I remember the Facebook feed, you said, I've finally handed this in. It's now handed in. I remember going, oh, girl, that's just epic. It's just such a
It's a feeling that all academics know well.
yeah, and I am
Yeah.
certainly not up to that stage of academia, but I am the widow of, I used to call myself a widow of a PhD student because my husband is
Oh,
and so I raised our children and I was the working person while my husband was
right.
doing the PhD. So I kind of feel like I endured that with him at the time.
My
I mean,
husband and I did PhDs at the same time.
oh, you're a sicko family,
Yeah,
Megan.
I know. We're still married.
Strawberry.
Wow, that's incredible.
Wow, two academics in the one home.
Mm.
But I
We've
suppose you
both finished now, but yeah, it wasn't the
Yeah.
best idea, I have to say.
full on. Is he in an area of theology?
No, no. That was so interesting. When I first became a pastor, I just had these conversations with people. It was just like as if people couldn't hear you. So I'd say, they'd ask, what do you do? And I'd say, I'm a pastor. And they'd say, oh, where does your husband pastor? And I'd be like,
Mm.
no, I pastor. And then they'll be saying, oh, okay. And so he's on pastoral team there as well. I'm like, no. And you get to the point of like, he has no theological training. He's never worked for a church. Yeah, so he's a psychologist, but his PhD was in epidemiology. So the epidemiology of mental health. Yeah.
Wow.
Has that changed in the last 20 years? Like that culture around, oh, so it must be your husband, you know? Like, because I know I would
Yeah.
recommend people, if you don't already, to follow Megan's feed on Facebook because you're a great follow. There's lots of great stuff to think about and talk about. But one of the things I love, maybe not the right word, but I'm confronted by is how often you share some like similar experiences even today. Has that changed in 20 years?
It depends on the context. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think things have definitely amongst Baptists, like now every Baptist state in Australia ordains women because Queensland's were the last to do it, and the first Queensland women were ordained in the last couple of months.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's all states now. So things have moved a lot amongst Baptists in that time. But then, of course, doing the podcast with Michael has really already had, I mean, I live in Sydney, so I already had Sydney Anglican connections, but that's really opened up for me sort of entry points into more conservative spaces in which it's still really unusual. Yeah. So probably had, if I was just staying in my own context, I would have said, oh, it changed, but then I've been kind of moving off into other contexts.
Well, I just know myself coming into my congregation at Wallara, at the interview, they asked me, which is probably really inappropriate, about what my husband's role would be in the church. And I remember the person from Presbytery stepping in and saying that wasn't an appropriate thing to say. I said, oh, no, please let me answer the question because you need to know. I said, Rob has he went to Morling and he did portion of his Bachelor of Theology many years after his PhD and decided he'd put that down. He needed to go off and be a person working in life science. And I said, Rob will come to church sometimes when he's in the country.
Right.
When he's in the country, he'll rock up to church on his Harley Davidson and he would happily make muffins or scones and stuff like that if you find that helpful. But we're not a 2-for-1 deal.
Yeah, yes.
Right? Because remember in the day, thinking of your mum and your dad, Megan, I'm thinking they got dad, who was the minister, and they probably looked at mum and got mum with all her training also and went, oh, good, we've got a 2-for-1 deal here.
Well, funnily enough, my mum was
pastoral.
sort of in the first lot of pastors' wives who were working full-time outside the home. So she was actually in some ways, you know, they were kind of expecting that of her. And she's like, nah, like I'm off. I'll do a bit, but
Running
actually
my
I'm
business.
the breadwinner here over
Yeah,
here.
Hello.
He's making
Yes.
Baptist money, so forget that. Like, yeah.
That's right.
And
That's
Mum,
right,
you can
yeah.
imagine knowing, like, I'm like a toned down version of my mother. So you can just back me up on that, can't you?
Can I just say you're not a toned down version of your mum? You and your mum are just so beautiful. I feel like I'm looking straight into Julie's face when I look at you. You giggle the same. You've got similar mannerisms. It's quite comforting actually being with you. And I love knowing that I've supported your childhood with my therapy sessions that I paid for years and years. Seeing your mum, your mother initially led me to Christ.
Yes, I knew about it at the time. I think I came to your baptism. Is that right?
I don't know.
I think
I'm
Mum
not
brought me along
sure.
to the baptism.
Oh, I don't remember that.
I'm not sure whether that's what she should do professionally, but
Probably.
yes.
Yeah, probably not. It was just totally extraordinary that she did, and your mother is the reason. Your mother and Jesus are the reasons I do what I do. And it's the whole impetus for why I am driven to do our Wellness HQ, our psychological counselling services that we provide free of charge, because I know the two things in my life that saved me was counselling, which was done through Julie Stone, and then Jesus being saved, which she gently told me about. Incredible. So much respect for your mother, and yeah. I just can't believe I feel like I've come full circle and here I am with you today.
She's one. My parents
You are so
wonderful.
blessed.
Yes. Yeah.
So is your father. Yeah.
Yeah, they were great. But yes, Mum found people's idea of what a pastor's wife should be like quite restrictive.
Yeah.
And I imagine, I think you mentioned as well, like, I imagine that through the podcast, your voice is broadcast to people that wouldn't necessarily be a comfortable thing to be preached to, but like to be hearing from a female pastor. Have you found what's that experience been like? Do you get pushback from other people outside of your own sort of Baptist circles because of the podcast?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think we do get a hate listen, but I'm like, go ahead. That helps our numbers. Yeah. Go for it. Do another hate listen.
Yeah.
You use a different account to do that hate listen.
Please, yeah.
Actually, get your friends to hate listen.
And communicate with us at the same time.
Yeah, so there's that, and then obviously, you're no longer sort of anonymous, so people have all sorts of ideas about you, even if they haven't listened, because now you're known as an ordained woman in public. So you got that. I mean, overall, probably absolutely that's happening. But also, on the other hand, had lots of people contact me and keep contacting me, who are in different environments, who want to talk to a female minister for various reasons. So a lot of women within contexts which do not have full equality of women in terms of their theology, that's going on, and men. And I get contacted by a lot of male ministers from conservative backgrounds who want to talk to me about things. Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? They haven't necessarily changed their minds or whatever, but they just have questions, or they ask me for resources, or they're working things through. So I actually kind of see that as part of my, I guess, public ministry, in that sense of kind of being known as a female pastor gives a space for people to come and ask questions or ask for advice or whatever. And so I feel like, sometimes that can be a bit of a burden, but I feel called by God to do that as well. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That's great. Yeah. And maybe as the final little section of this, you're now back in congregational ministry.
Yes.
Having been finished your PhD. I'd be curious to know, is there anything that you've taken from, is there anything? I'm sure there's a whole list of things, but like, what are the main things that have sort of transferred over from that PhD, or not even the PhD specifically, but the time specifically in academia, that have shaped your congregational ministry in a way that it wasn't the same before that time in
Great
academia?
question.
Yeah, well, I've actually been, I don't know with what time I think I'm going to do this, but
Mm.
considering like, do I write something about being a pastor theologian? Interesting, of course, something that both Michael and I, so he's has been in academia and also like me now, in a church role. But I think that we underestimate how much you need theological depth in the pastoral role,
Mm.
and how much some of the problems that we're seeing within society and in churches are because we need a more rigorous and a more thoughtful and considered theology.
Mm.
So yes, I think there can be unfortunate disconnect between the academy and the church. And I think all sorts of problems arise with that, both directions. I think there's a problem when you've got people in the academy who just don't have an understanding of what it's like to be deeply involved in the community of God. And then likewise, a problem if you're always just caught up in all of the programs and there's lots of deadlines in pastoral ministry, right? You're just constantly having to get stuff done. But I think I bring to it, and I think I was probably because I was always involved in some kind of academia, I think the whole time I've been in pastoral ministry. But I think I'm even more convinced that bringing that kind of theological rigor, but in a way that is understandable and constructive for people who they're not trained up in it,
Yeah.
is vitally important for the health of the church. Yep. And I think the health of the society. Like, I think what we're seeing, here's a podcast recommendation. I've been listening to a podcast called Sons of Patriarchy, which is about a particular thing in Doug Wilson and his whole group over in America and how they're contributing to Christian nationalism. And I think a lot of the things that our people are getting into because of being social media connected and in a very globally connected world online is a lot of it, there's an underlying theology and understandings that we need to address with people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm kind of really sort of trying to go, well, God's called me as the full person that I am into ministry. What do I bring it into it? And part of that is that academic rigor, I think. Yeah.
So I think I've been noticing in the last year or two in my own, I guess, young adult spaces, but not specifically just for young adults. There's this misconception, I think, that young people don't want, like someone was describing it to me as nerd shit the other day. Like, we don't want that nerd shit. I'm like, no. Like, if you're engaged enough to come to church,
Yes.
there's this misconception that we don't want to go deep. We just want to be given the cream, like
yes.
the fluffy stuff that makes us feel good. No, like people actually want and need that deeper level, that more rigorous and meaty stuff that you actually have to spend time in, and you actually have to, a lot of it isn't comfortable. A lot of it is like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that. That was a half an hour sermon that I have about 8 takeaways, that 7 of which I'm not comfortable with. I have to go and think about that and actually do some, like, go to the gym and do some work.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a misconception that I've come across a lot, and I try and smack it on the head as soon as I see it, that young people, but people don't want that. If you're engaged enough that you've come to church, that's just, it's a complete misconception. So I just hearing you speak like that, that's music to my ears. I love that.
No,
because
it's cool, isn't it?
100%.
I just recently, I was talking to my church council, and a member on that church council said to me, so when are you going to be finishing this master's, Vanessa? Because I whinge about it all the time. I give dates about what I'm studying, and I find that the study informs my preaching.
Of course.
I'm a much better preacher because I've got all this new depth to my theology and content, and I'm thinking in a different way. And I really enjoy that rigor myself. And this woman said to me, an older lady, she said to me, Vanessa, when is this over? When are we going to stop hearing about this, pretty much? And I said, I said, hun, I've got 2 subjects to go. They've asked me if I'd be interested in doing a PhD, of which I'm now not keen because it's too bloody scary. And I don't think
I wouldn't say I recommend, but anyway.
No, I think I've decided I'd rather write a book, and team up with other people and write a really good book and put my energy into that. But I said to her, don't you want your minister to be highly academic so that I can educate you on the things that you may not already know? And she said, well, I suppose so. And I thought, oh, it's a part of our ordination vows, Megan, that we have to do lifelong training. Is it the same in the Baptist?
Yeah.
We have to.
Yes,
and
it
so
is. Yes.
Why on earth would you want your minister to be thick, mate?
or at the very least, not open to the idea of learning more stuff.
And kind of also that lack of humility that it would be in thinking that you've got it all sorted out, and then you don't need to learn and grow and rethink. And
I'm only just starting to work it out.
Every time I preach a passage, I don't go back to the old version of it, because always there's something new always comes out.
Always.
Me, every time. Yeah.
We literally, it was yesterday, wasn't it? We spoke to Reverend Dr. Peter Powell.
Yep.
One of the quotes I wrote down from him was, and strong language, but he said, the essence of sin is the desire to be certain, is one of the things he said passingly that I went, oh my goodness, I need to write that down.
Yeah,
but I think and I'm not saying, I'm not ascribing sin necessarily to any of this stuff.
Yeah.
But like that desire and
to be right.
To be right, but also to go, great, underline that. Don't have to think about that ever again. It's really, I think it's dangerous.
Oh, and you do, I mean, in some ways, sometimes, and I'm being very careful in how I say this, because sometimes churches are small for bad reasons. So let's not sort of go the other direction. But just because a church is large doesn't mean that it's producing good disciples. Do you know what I mean? Like, people are attracted to things like it being very entertaining, or not being challenged, or, as you say, certainty. People sometimes like having this guru who tells them everything to think. But our Savior, our Messiah, is Christ.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
So I've got to always go, right, Megan, also, you are not the Messiah. This is
I love that.
You're just a very naughty girl, no.
So you mentioned the podcast is on hold, I imagine, until next year, because we're recording.
Yeah, the next season is next year. Yes, yes, we're in the middle of planning at the moment. Yeah.
Wonderful. So, what can people expect from, with all due respect, in the new year? Do you have any plans that you're able to talk about?
Oh yeah, well,
planning?
We're going to look at the first episode, I think, might be discipleship. We haven't quite got that decided. And I do want to look at high control environments. That's another thing. So there's quite a few things.
Fantastic.
And then Michael and I have had all year this other little side project, which hasn't quite got up, and I want it to get up in the new year. And I can give you the name of it. It's called Water. It's called Water Online, WADR Online. So hopefully by the new year, we'll have managed to get that out there.
Great.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
It's very exciting. Yeah.
So yes. But, I don't know, like, we're always just doing stuff in our spare time. So,
but you've got loads of that.
Yeah. Hopefully over the season break, we get that out there. So if you either join the Facebook group, or you follow me, or you follow Michael, you'll keep up to date with what we've got going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Incredible.
And recommend people go and do that, because it's, definitely something that I've got a lot out of. It was actually, Claire, who says hello.
Yes, I was Claire's pastor. Yeah, twice. Yeah. I was her pastor twice. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. She was got me onto With All Due Respect. Would have been 2 or 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend that people go and check out the podcasting work that you and Michael do. Where can people reach you if they want to follow up on anything that we've talked about today?
Yep. You can just message me on social media. I gave up on X ages ago.
Good call.
No one's convinced me into Blue Sky yet. Anyway, but Facebook and Insta, I'm on. Or you can get me through my church website or something. It's on my Rouse Hill Baptist Church. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
We'll have all that below, I think.
Yeah, listeners and watchers will be able to find all that good stuff down below. And if you want to get in touch with us with anything and anything related to this, we obviously pass on, and I'm sure we'll end up doing this again in the not so distant future, so we can follow up anything. You can contact us, obviously, as always, at filthyhopepod@gmail.com. Or join our Facebook group as well. All that stuff, as always, is down below.
Imagine if we had, just imagine, Jonty, if we had Megan and Michael
that'd be
on
great.
a panel.
That'd be great.
Wouldn't that just be amazing? A Filthy Hope panel.
Power of manifestation.
Oh, I'm going to put that into being.
You'll have to ask him. He probably won't be able to refuse you, Vanessa.
Oh,
he's learned how to sort of buffer himself against my wiles, but he probably doesn't have.
Oh, maybe I'll give it a hot crack then, Megan.
Yeah.
Okay.
CC me and we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I look forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for your time.
Amazing. Thanks, Megan.
This is a breath